So this one's going to cover some advice on gold and silver, where I screwed up personally, so you don't have to. I started buying gold and silver 15 years ago, and in that time we've seen some things. We saw a global financial crisis in 2008, global pandemic in 2020, and we've had other things, a series of regional wars, some isolated economic events like the recent bank failures. It seems like we can't go long without some kind of event, and those are the times where gold and silver have been pretty exciting. This is when people are the most tuned in, and I can tell you from personal experience, it's also when people make the most mistakes. Well, looking back in time is really the only way to know if you were making mistakes, and like I said, I have 15 years to look back on, 15 years with more than a few mistakes. So if you give me a few minutes here, we're going to separate some good advice from the bad. So let me tell you about the good times first. Between 2013 and 2019, I was buying consistently. I really only had a few things that I was interested in at the time, and there's a good reason for it. If we switch up the timeline here, we can see that there was a pretty strong lull in that period of time between 2013 and 2019. So during that time, I didn't have any reasons to panic buy. I didn't pay too much in premium. I didn't buy weird things. I just stuck to a plan. Now, if you're doing the math on 15 years back, I came into gold and silver in 2008. I came in on the housing market crash. So big financial event, kind of a duck and cover asset in my mind. It was chaos insurance. And I was just kind of figuring things out. That's when I was buying the Roosters and the Sovereigns. I eventually landed on the American Gold Eagles, the Buffaloes, the Canadian Maple Leafs, and I started buying silver as well. So American Silver Eagles is all I was into at the time. Well, this is a good reminder of what was happening at the time. And it just got to a point where the prices were too rich for me, so I ended up taking a few years off. So those few years between 2011 and 2013, they changed the way I looked at both gold and silver. It was my first experience with how bad the popular information is about metals. Now, I've done enough investing to know that buying into a spike in price is not something you do casually. So survival instinct has this condition to tune into sudden movement. Keeps us alive, but it's also good instinct here as well, because the reason is that if you're rushing into a swell in price and that swell is created by others rushing in as well, at some point it's going to come back down. People rush into an investment in hopes of making a profit, and they rush out trying to lock it in. So this is us buying in normal, boring times, and then this is where the swell starts to come in. So we see the spot price of silver go from 18 to 29 to 48, and that's really where the speculators were piling on, and then it went back down to 19-ish. Hard to see it here, but it's right around 19. Now, the reason I say you don't want to buy into that swell casually is that all those speculators were also looking to get back out, and in a case like this, the rush works both ways. Frenzy to get in, frenzy to get back out. Okay, so if you believe the traditional advice on gold and silver, that it's a safe haven asset, or a step up from that it's chaos insurance, well, maybe you start to buy more as chaos ensues, like it did in 2011. You definitely don't sell it like people did in 2012 and 13 because you think things are only going to get worse. So now you have two motivations in the mix. One group is basically in it for profit. The other group is in it for insurance. So if we look at what's happening here, the first group, the Profiteers, they're running the price up and they're twitching for the right time to cash out. All the while the other group is buying for the long hold. So the second group is simply paying extra during those short-term frenzies. And that's why the time between 2013 and 2019 was good for me. We didn't have those price spikes. We didn't have the squirrels on fire. We didn't have the YouTubers and the celebrity dealers yelling that, hey, the end is near. You better have your house in order. It was just slow and steady savings. So if we zoom in on the popular advice again, it tends to be that paper currency is on the verge of collapse and just always on the verge and always looking over the edge. And you need metals to protect you. That's the story in a nutshell, at least. Well, When the story is the most popular, gold and silver tends to be higher in price. The price movement tends to be more volatile. So buyers are more driven by anxiety. And I can tell you from personal experience, that's when the mistakes are made. I would say the first mistake I think we can all agree on is just buying when prices are too high. Now, nobody can tell you that the price tomorrow is going to be higher than it is today or lower, but we can look at recent history and we can see if we're buying at a high based on that. So the conflict in Israel, it's a really good example. Prices spiked 9% on that event, and you can really only see that when you look back. So if we bought at that top, well, we were buying when prices were too high. We were spending almost $200 an ounce more than we would have spent just a few weeks prior. And that's when everyone is out there giving the advice or suggesting the advice that you should get out there and buy. The hype is very high around those times, so anxiety is going to make us do things that we probably wouldn't have otherwise done. If you want a less acute version of that, it would be all this talk of BRICS nations conspiring to topple the dollar. Dollar is doomed. Buy more gold and silver. Bank failures, that's another example. Banks are going to fail. Get your money out now. Buy gold and silver. Well, those are really good examples because during those times, that's when we're seeing the metals prices spiking. And those spikes come back down. We see short-term price movements correct. So the patient buyer saves a lot of money buying the same amount of metal over time, or they buy more with the same amount of money. Now, it doesn't matter. To some people, they're going to tell you paper currency is worthless. That's a real pearl. If you have a strong desire to get rid of your money, well, it's not going to be hard to do it. I would say, though, it's not a good mindset to fall into. Now, in addition to just paying too much, another mistake that's easy to make is buying the cheaper option when prices are high. So you'll hear the banks are failing, you need to get your money out of the banks, but gold coins might be expensive at that point. So maybe you buy, I don't know, a random gold bar or some kind of old European gold that seems like a deal at the time because the premiums are lower. Well, when prices correct, you just have lower premium gold that you still overpaid for. So these are all things that I've done, particularly in the time between 2008, 2011, and then again more recently in 2020. Even though I have that time in there where I was making only good decisions, I still fell back a little bit now and then. Now, all that said, I still try to be patient with my buying. I try to stick to a schedule when it makes sense, and now I try to take a break when it doesn't. But since the pandemic hit, I have bought more, I've bought at bad times, and I've bought things that I wouldn't have otherwise bought. So why does all that even matter here? Well, if we're trying to get ahead, get into a net positive space, well, we have to ignore some of the hype advice in the moment and look at the bigger picture. For the periods of time that I was patient, I did the best by far. If I would have bought any silver at all in that 2011 period of time when spot price reached $48, I would still be holding the bag there. I would be upside down on the price, and you can bet that people were out there saying that you needed to buy silver while that was happening. The spot price of silver today is a little bit less than $24, so there are times where you should really take a break. Now, if I was looking at the longer term, even with some looser buying a few of those years, I'm still ahead. And I say that because it's true. I'm not just saying it. I don't see gold or silver as an investment. I see it as a savings, and it has outpaced cash and treasuries in that time frame. Now, let's just be realistic. Allowing myself an operable time machine, I would go back a few years and I would go heavier on a few of the standout investments, some of the crazy stuff that popped up out of the blue. But as a savings, gold and even silver has been pretty solid. Now, I haven't been doing as much silver lately, but it can do a lot of the same things. But this is an important distinction. It is a savings. When I started making these videos, I was calling it that. I was saying it's a savings model when the crowd was forecasting a moonshot. And I think that was really the root of all the bad advice that was floating around. Well, hopefully by now, we can see where that went wrong. So if we pull all this together, I would say that if you go into gold and silver with clear eyes, I think that it's a great model. I've used it for savings personally. I think I've had pretty good success. This is, something like $76,000 on the desk here. And had this just been another savings account, well, I would have rated it a dozen times over those 15 years. Now, I did sell some down. That's a story for another time, but I brought it back. Had I been buying in on the hype, though, expecting a moonshot, well, I would have bought at highs. I probably would have even sold at lows because that's what happens. Frustration with an asset will do that to you. It gets you to make bad decisions on the way out, just like it gets you to make them on the way in. So really there are two ways we can look at this. One is that had I followed the popular advice over this 15 years and bought more on panic events when the people were hyping that need, well, I would be upside down on cost. No question there. The other though is that even allowing for a few mistakes, because I've definitely made some, patience and timing has kept me ahead. And it's not that I bought less, it's just that I was more careful. I worked on that timing, and I think that that's the best advice that you can have. Just be careful. Ignore that doom hype. 15 years in, I would say for sure it's been worth it in the long run. So let's call it good there. Let us know what you're up to, how you've done over the years, if you've been at it for a while, or just what you're paying attention to if not. I would say gold and silver have a way of tugging at emotions, and the people out there giving advice, well, they tend to be sucked in most of all. Either that, or they're good at playing at your emotions to sell their metals. Just a good thing to keep in mind. So let us know what you think. And then while you're in the comments, be sure to hit that like button if you found any of this interesting. Be sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on if you'd like to hear more on the topic. And if you're still here, thanks again for watching. I always appreciate your time. Take care.